Chasing. She looped back around. She's got nothing there, dude. Push that one. I'm pushing Gibby. Gibby's down. She's on me. Thank you. Hey folks, Tony Mo here. This week I've got a bit of an interesting discussion piece for you. This is something I've really been stewing on the last few days, but I think I finally know how I want to go about discussing it, talking about it with you. And I do think it's a little bit. I think it's an important conversation, actually. I think especially for a lot of you young folks out there who maybe watch this channel. And according to my demographics, there are quite a few of you, under the age of 20, under the age of 18, even, who watch this. And obviously, first-person shooters, especially with things like Fortnite, Call of Duty, Apex, still being extremely popular. They're probably a big part of your gaming landscape, depending on whether or not you play first-person shooters. If you play shooters, you probably play these games, right? Or I've heard of them or play at least one of them, and you probably take them relatively serious with your friends. You probably get angry. You probably throw things. You probably call people names you shouldn't call them. Hopefully not. In general, I think that this particular scene has always been extremely toxic. And there's a lot of different subsections of toxicity we could go into here today. But really, I want to focus on the one that I think actually is detrimental to personal growth. As I've been playing a lot of Apex Legends and Titanfall 2 over the past few weeks, I think, in general, the last few years for me, as now an older person at the ripe age of 30, I've been taking, on a personal level, the first-person shooter games I play a lot more seriously. Like, I got pretty big into Valorant. That was a really fun learning curve for me as somebody who's played very little Counter-Strike well. It was pretty intense, is the way to say it, to jump into Valorant and to really learn recoil patterns and really work on my aim and get my setup stable so I could really look at everything that I was doing personally and learn from that. And that's something I've always pushed here on the channel. When I was covering Titanfall 2, I pushed it. But I don't think I ever really went super hard in on the details with it. I usually was just like, hey, have a good time and don't be toxic, asshole. I think we can go well beyond that because these games do offer so much room for you to grow. Specifically we look at Titanfall 2 and Apex, two very different experiences, but two that are very much tied together for me right now. One is a very fast movement focused shooter with a lot of high level movement focused mechanics. Aim is very important, positioning is very important, game sense is obviously very important. Apex, tons of that. Game sense in Apex is through the roof valuable. Being able to predict what the enemy is doing, being able to make really good reads. Your positioning is so important, and your aim is unbelievably valuable, right? There's so much room to grow in these games. But I think when the average person, especially a younger person, sits down to play a game like this, the furthest they ever get, even as somebody who maybe says to themselves, I want to be the best, I want to be X Twitch streamer and pro player, the furthest they ever get is TTV Wraithmane Pub Stomper. They never really get beyond that. They never get beyond being the person who calls someone else who chose a better strategy and beat them out a pussy. That's such a common thing, right? I get it. We all get a little bit tilted, but I feel like it's unbelievable the amount of times I hear people call someone else, the coward because they made the smarter play. And I think that very much ties into that toxicity that I spoke of. There is almost an immediate reaction to accuse the other person, the person on the other end, the one who dealt out your death, of being at fault for your mistakes. Oh, it's on them. They're shit. They're terrible. They didn't deserve that, blah, blah, blah. Rather than stopping for a second to say to yourself, what could I have done better? What could I have done right there? And that's the difference between an actual professional player. When you sit down and you watch someone play a game at an extremely high professional level, and it's, potentially on their stream, the best players that we've ever seen in the Quake scene and the Halo scene have been people who are relatively calm and cool and who have that ability to reflect on what they just did, to look back and say, bad move there, made a mistake there, and to not just turn and blame everyone else. That gets you nowhere. I mean, if anything, it almost immediately clouds your ability to acknowledge the mistakes you've made because you've just chosen to ignore the mistakes you've made and immediately head for the blame game. And I just think that's a terrible, terrible precedent to set. And again, I think it's all sort of a part of this particular mindset of like what it's like to be the best. And I'm passionate, so I'm angry, and you're a pussy because you did this. And I just find that, number one, incredibly stupid. But number two, also really bizarre. You know, there's a deeper discussion to be had for why we probably got there, particularly with FPS games. But when I look at other hobbies that I personally engage in, like miniature painting and, you know, scale modeling are two big ones for me, woodworking, like all of these things, they're all about personal improvement. You don't sit there, right, as a miniature painter and like really fuck up the eyes on your Space Marine helmet and then turn to the person who's sitting next to you also painting and say, this is your fault. The fuck, man. Obviously, it's not a competitive thing, but let's say you're at a competitive painting competition. Let's say you entered a miniature in a competition at something like Gen Con, and you lose, and you simply immediately turn and blame the person who won and say, yeah, but you did that thing, and that's cheesy, and you knew the judges like it, blah, blah, blah. And you come up with a million fucking excuses for why your painting lost, rather than immediately looking at your painting, stepping away from what was probably, you know, potentially months or weeks of painting, and really have a bit of reflection and say, okay,
Please, a moment to reflect.
You know, I can see where I went wrong here. The judges have given me feedback because they were kind enough to do that when they critiqued my piece in this competition. Let's look at that feedback, right? That's what happens in like every other hobby. In first-person shooters, we don't talk about that enough. That's not the precedent that is set, especially for young people coming into these games as hobbies, and that's really what they should be looked at as. There's also, again, a very dangerous and I think absurdly high expectation for individuals who start playing Fortnite and stuff like this. Like they're going to be the next so-and-so, the next this and that, right? And I totally understand why all of that happens. I just think it would be lovely if more people, especially big names, had conversations about, you know, like FPS games as an actual dedicated hobby. Like, we're not talking about just playing them as a casual hobby. We're talking about the type of individual, like myself, who wants to sit down and wants to chase personal improvement because they enjoy it. Wild idea. You're going to do it because you think it's fun. And that's it. Not because you need to be better than the other person. Not because you need to be like, yo, bro, back when I was 16, I was a fucking pub stomper. I was the best. Like, there's so much ego that just needs to get thrown out the window in these conversations. And I think it could open up such massive potential for people to actually sit down and start to enjoy these hobbies in a way that is just not the norm right now. Which is a point at which I'd like to plug someone else. So Moki Sniper, fantastic individual who makes awesome Titanfall / Apex style content, meaning he covers both of these games, and sometimes he blends them two together and it's amazing. He recently sat down with Coach Nihil, who is a coach at Apex University, who runs his own channel series all about personal improvement in Apex. And it's been a treasure trove for me personally as someone who's like getting knee deep in Apex, again, as a hobbyist who wants to really do well, who wants to, you know, maybe at some point even chase Predator rank with some friends, who wants to just seek out that personal improvement because I think it's fun. I absolutely love playing a night session of Apex, having my ups and downs, yelling at myself a bunch about the terrible mistakes I've made, and the next morning looking at the footage from my losses and from my wins and, you know, actually taking notes and saying, okay, hey, this is what I did wrong. Again, our movement there, we're not focusing on that. We're having a lot of trouble with moving when our guns are out. We're sliding too early and we're getting, you know, crouches instead of slides. Like, our positioning was bad there. We overcommitted. You know, again, we're not making callouts to our team enough here. We're not focusing our team enough and getting them to play tighter with us. Like, I adore that stuff. I adore that self-analysis. And I don't think that everyone's just going to immediately love the idea of that. But I do think that most people just don't even think about that. You know, I'm not saying that, like, if you are a casual player and you just don't care about self-improvement, you're just out here to have fun, that you should suddenly do this. But I do think there's a whole crowd of people, again, who think that they're the very best. You know, those TTV pub stompers, you know, that whole sort of cliche, if you will. And they're not doing these sorts of things. And they're wondering why they're losing. And they're just consistently blaming the person on the other end of the screen, right? Rather than ever even considering what it is they might have done wrong. Can we please get away from that? You, right now, if you're watching this, you're a younger person, you're playing Titanfall 2, you're playing Apex Legends. Consider everything I've said here today. Really take it to heart. And if you find yourself as that individual who just screams at the other person, who gets angry, and who blames everything but themselves for their losses and for their failures and for their shortcomings in these games, ask yourself why that is, and then realize that the moment you start to take a look at your own gameplay and you start to look at your own mistakes and your own shortcomings, you will actually become a better player. And the improvement that you'll make, probably in just the first week of having this realization and slowly working to tune out that toxicity, is going to be noticeable, and it's going to be so rewarding. I promise you that. It will be great. You will suddenly be like, wow, there was this thing I used to do all the time, and I didn't even like acknowledge it, and now I don't do it anymore. And I win more gunfights because of it. Because it really is that simple at the end of the day. Obviously, the complexity comes from you having to actually put in the work here, but it really is that simple at the end of the day. So that's going to do it for me today, folks. I think there's so much more that can be said about this topic, but it's just something I've been thinking about. And again, just the general mindset that is sort of built up for people in competitive gaming scenes. You know, really it goes beyond the FPS. We could talk about like strategy games, real-time strategy games, turn-based strategy games, you know, whatever. You know, the toxicity comes first. And there's a lack of people just sharing the knowledge that, hey, you know, self-reflection is everything here. So feel free to leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you, like, as a player in these situations. You know, are you somebody who's willing to, like, acknowledge that this was you in the past, or maybe that this is you currently? Let me know just in general how you play games, the type of individual you tend to be. If you want to be open and honest about this thing, that's, you know, a lot of people have been there. I personally never grew up as a very competitive person in this sense. My brother and I just did things together because we enjoyed doing them together. We never really competed against each other. We competed with each other against other people. And I think that really allowed me to avoid anyway, sort of having that sort of toxic competitive mindset, because my brother and I were just like always like, we're just going to do this together and have fun, and that's all that matters. And I think in a lot of cases that allowed us to be very successful in things. We played tournament speedball together and were very successful as young people, and we even played in local tournaments and won, and like we just had a good time, and there was never really a thought in our minds about like, hey, you're shit, we're better. So I don't know, it's a whole interesting psychological thing, obviously. But yeah, feel free to share your thoughts and your stories down in the comment section below if you're comfortable with doing that. Hopefully this is something that, I don't know, resonates with certain people, especially again younger folks, but it could be older folks. I mean, I'm 30. And I've come to this realization that I actually really like making improvements in first-person shooter games, that I find the whole experience very satisfying, very fun, very rewarding, and that it's honestly one of my favorite parts of the hobby that has been video games for me. So take care of yourselves out there, folks. Huge shout out to everyone over on my Patreon who helps make videos like this possible. In fact, this video was the early ad-free video for the month of November for patrons. So if you would like to get in on that, you can click the link down in the description below. Starting at just $1, you'll get access to one of those early ad-free videos every single month. You'll get access to our private Discord server, as well as my behind-the-scenes feed over on Patreon, where you hear me talk about projects like this before they actually happen here on the channel. Take care of yourselves. Be awesome to one another. And I'll see you all in the next one.